produced by Free Grace International in partnership with the Grace Evangelical Society.
Hi, my name is Shawn Lazar with Grace Evangelical Society, and I'm the editor of Grace in Focus magazine. One of the questions that we get asked fairly often is, what kind of salvation does Jesus promise? Now, I'll tell you what that question means. See, a lot of people think that what Jesus gives you is a chance to save yourself. You can save yourself if you are good enough or faithful enough or kind of continue in religious things so that by the end of your life, you're good enough to be saved when you die. Or sometimes people mean it like Jesus gives you a temporary life or a temporary salvation. Let's call it probation salvation. And now it's up to you to keep it, either with good works or continued faithfulness or whatever the requirement is. See, I think what that comes down to is a question of what kind of salvation does Jesus promise? Does he just promise you a chance to save yourself? Does he just promise you temporary life? Does he just promise you probation? He's just going to see how you're going to do before he decides whether or not to save you in the end. I want to give you another kind of perspective on this. I believe that Jesus gives everlasting life. He gives everlasting salvation. Why do I say that? Think of John 5:24, and you can read this all throughout John's gospel. He says, "Most assuredly I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me has," what kind of life? Everlasting life. I always ask my kids, how long is everlasting? It's forever. It's everlasting. It lasts forever. "And shall not come into judgment, but is passed from death into life." Now think about those three things. He gives you everlasting life. And if that's not clear enough to you, Jesus says, you shall not come into judgment. How many Christians are expecting that one day they will appear before one last judgment, something called the last judgment, which is not mentioned in Scripture. In Scripture, you have the great white throne judgment. But they think, I'm going to appear before this last judgment, and that's where I'm going to find out whether or not I was really good enough to be saved. Well, that's not what Jesus promised. That's not the kind of salvation that he promises. He promises you everlasting life. The moment you believe in him, your eternal destiny is settled at that time. That's why he says, you shall not come into judgment. Not for your eternal destiny. There will come a time when Jesus evaluates your life to lavish on you eternal rewards. But that's a completely different matter. Now look at that third thing that Jesus promises. He says, if you believe, you have passed from death into life. That is a fact. That is something that happens to you at the moment of faith. Sometimes we call that being born again or being regenerated. That's the kind of salvation that Jesus promises to whoever believes in him, to whoever is persuaded that his promise is true. It is everlasting salvation. This is salvation that you can't lose, that you'll never ever come into judgment again forever again, and you've passed permanently from death into life. It's a final salvation. It is something that is secure the millisecond that you believe in Jesus for this eternal salvation. He talks about this again in a conversation with Martha in John 11:25 and 26. He says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who, look at that word, believes in me. He who believes in me, though he may die, and he means physically, just as Lazarus died physically in this setting, he shall live. Why shall they live? Because Jesus is the resurrection. If you believe in him, you will be resurrected to everlastingly. You'll have a glorified body and be with him forever. But look what he says, and whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. So you have this element of, you have to believe in him, and you will never die. Why? Because you have everlasting life. That's what everlasting life means. It means you will never die spiritually. We all have to die physically. God has to get rid of this flesh, and he's going to give us new bodies. But the moment you believe in Jesus, you have everlasting life. You've passed from death into life. You will never come into judgment. You will never die. You will be resurrected and be with God and Jesus forever. So to the question, what kind of salvation does Jesus promise? He promises everlasting salvation to whoever believes in him for it. It's not a chance to be saved. It's not a chance to prove yourself. It's not probation. It's permanent. It's forever. And it's life with him.
Produced by Free Grace International in partnership with the Grace Evangelical Society. For more Free Grace content, visit GES's website at faithalone.org and FGI's website at freegrace.in.